I'll quickly introduce our moderator, Shaista Sirajuddin. She's the Professor of English Literature and former Head, Department of English and Dean of Humanities, University of Punjab. While her specialization in 20th century drama, her interests over the years have included post-colonial poetry and drama, subcontinental history, travel writing, and non-fictional work on nature and ecology. She holds MA from Cambridge and an M Literature from Oxford. She is an animal carer and lives in Lahore. Over to you, ma'am.
Many years ago, a grade 17 official in Karachi asked Salman a question which I think many of us feel perhaps we can ask as well, which is, what is a travel writer? But this grade 17 official didn't actually ask the question. He said, so, you get on a bus from Sadr to say Landi and write about the fare, the condition of the bus, and the way the maniac at the wheel drives. This was not with a question mark. So this was the understanding of this grade 17, and I am not being elitist here at all, official, and this is the travel writer. And I hope that we will not end up in this session asking him the fare from here back to Lahore, the way that various maniacs rule the roost in our capital city, and so on and so forth. So Salman, I believe you wanted to talk about something that a lot of times people are confused about, and that is, in a sense, what is the broad difference between a tourist and a traveler?
Okay, but before we go on to this, with reference to what you just said, this is again from the 1980s, late 80s in Karachi. I was in Mirpur Khas and I was hauled up by ISI for being an Indian agent. One of the questions, the beginning question was, क्या करते हैं आप? तो मैंने कहा पता नहीं है कोई पुलिस का होगा, दाढ़ी उसने रखी हुई थी. तो क्या मैंने कहा मैं लिखा रही हूँ. कहता है अर्जी नवीस. मैंने कहा हाँ जी, वो डाक खाने के बाहर हुआ. He turned out to be a captain. The difference between a traveler and a tourist is very simple. A tourist just goes places. He's the been there, done that item. And I always say you don't do places, you experience them. The traveler experiences them. He reads about them. He knows the history, he knows the geography, the geology, and so many other things before he hits a place, and he doesn't do it.
You've said that traveling for the sake of traveling, I had learned over the years, was something to be looked at with plenty of suspicion. So we are full of suspicion about your travels, and we'd like you to tell us perhaps some memorable moments. I mean, you have traveled the length and breadth of Pakistan, and you've looked not only at a landscape, and you've looked at people, you've looked at the interaction of people with each other and with you. You've looked at the natural life. In fact, if you've had the opportunity to look at some of Salman's books, there are beautiful pictures, not just of mountains and roads and so on and so forth, but of bird life, of vegetation. And he is one of the few people, I think, in Pakistan who actually always puts the Latin name for a bird or for a plant And it's not to show off his erudition, obviously, but he is an extremely erudite man. And I, for one, feel humbled in his company. I have been a reader of Salman's for many years. So maybe you would like to tell us a little bit about how it all kicked off, other than what it says in the brochure. You know, that he studied in a certain place and he worked in a certain place, and then the lady in PTDC said, why don't you write for whatever. But perhaps you could share something more personal that prompted you to travel. Did you have wanderlust right from a very early age?
Wanderlust, yes, right from a very, very early age. When I was very little, in our school days, there used to be a modern school atlas published probably by Oxford University Press. It was not a big, like these big atlases, it was a little book. And my favorite thing was lying on my stomach on my bed with the atlas on the floor and traveling on the map with my fingers or with just my eyes, and then turning pages over. Contour lines or mountains which were always shaded brown intrigued me greatly, and deserts. So I think there was this a thing to travel, and I have to tell this young lady here, I did serve in the army. I was when I was in the army, that was my first real independence from home. When I was not, my father was not breathing down my neck telling me to understand mathematics, which I never could, and I started traveling around. I was posted in Khariyan for 5 years. I walked in the Pabbi Hills, no big deal, but it was a great experience walking in the Pabbi Hills all by myself, or going to Rohtas and talking to a man in 1974 who then said he was about 80 something years old, and hearing from him living history. The things he said about Rohtas are now forgotten. That was how history was transferred in the old days. Now, after television and everything, you know, things have changed. After the army, I went to live in Karachi and worked in a multinational firm where we had a 2-day weekend. That set me off. And I remember coming back to Karachi and telling my Urdu speaking and Gujarati colleagues where I had been, and they would say, I could hear them saying this, कैप्टन साला पागल हो गया, पता नहीं घर बैठ के क्या क्या सोचता है, आके हमें दास्तानें सुनाता है.
In a country where actually not a great deal of history is written, I think that the traveler really is a historian, and he's a historian, and he's in the process of writing his travel books. He's not only recalling the past, he's also recording the present. I think that as a travel writer, I see you as somebody who straddles both past and very much the present, because you are moving across terrain very much in the present. You are experiencing contemporary life and all its discontents, and of course its pleasures. But if you look, if one looks at your books, there is very often a long list of historical material that you have read, that you have drawn on. How does that fit in with, the fact that there is sedentary work that you obviously do, but then there is a tremendous amount of physical activity, which is so important, because he's not an armchair writer. How do you balance these two things? And when do you write? When do you read?
Driving from Lahore to Islamabad, I was thinking I should have taken the Devu. I could have read 4 hours on the bus. You see, a travel writer is not just a teller of a travel story, he's an historian, a geographer essentially, maybe a little bit of a geologist, an anthropologist, and a sociologist, and then finally maybe a little bit of an autobiographer as well. You see, without reading the earlier sources, you have to draw on them to make a comparison between what they saw 150 years ago or 200 years ago and what you are now looking at. So it's very essential. If you're not reading, you're a terrorist. Not a terrorist, but
a terrorist. True. You talk about unsurveyed being the magic word in the Apricot Road to Yarkand. Can you tell us a little bit about the kind of frisson, the kind of excitement that the word unsurveyed evokes in you? ये आप ही का लफ्ज़ है, आपने इस्तेमाल किया है.
I tell you, unsurveyed. I don't know where I first saw this map with a blank on it and a stamp, a large stamp across this blank space saying unsurveyed. And then I read Eric Shipton's book Blank on the Map, which just did it to me, because he also speaks of this tantalizing. It's for a geographer or for an explorer, it's a very, very tantalizing word, unsurveyed. So I still get goosebumps if I go to the Royal Geographical Society in London and I look at these old maps. I get really worked up just by this word unsurveyed. It sets me off. It does something very, very strange. I cannot even explain it.
It's like discovering a new land, I suppose.
Yes,
there is
absolutely.
a possibility that somewhere, beyond the horizon, there is something that nobody has discovered yet.
Mm-hmm.
So, as somebody who, in a sense, has such a close affinity with the land mass, this entire land mass, with its diversity and its different cultures and so on, do you feel dispirited at times?
Dispirited?
Not about the landmass, but about the way that the past in many instances is being eroded.
Terribly. I feel some years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, I was in Rasool Nagar in Gujranwala. There was on the banks of the Chenab an old house with a plaque saying the summer house of Maharaja Ranjit Singh Sahab Bahadur, 1833, I think. So I had some transparencies from the old days. I went back thinking I should digitize this building before it falls to pieces, and what I found was a complete ruin, a hulk. No roofs, nothing, absolutely. And I knew it had been vandalized. It later on turned out that it had been vandalized by the Nazim of Rasool Nagar, who had taken all the timbers from the building. These timbers were teak and first-class pine. And that man is a Jat, a Tarar incidentally. Ranjit Singh was a Jat too, but look here, he has no affinity with the history or what the land was offering to so many people. And that's just one example. I've gone to Takht Suleiman looking at the Chalghoza forests and to see the wanton cutting of Chalghoza trees. A Chalghoza tree begins to fruit after 150 years. A 1,000-year-old Chalghoza tree is a young tree, and there are people cutting these down to turn them into windows. They're only good for window jambs and door jambs. So yes, dispirited terribly.
I'd just like to read to you in connection with what he's just said about flora and fauna. This extract is from a longer piece entitled Reflections upon Meeting an Ancient Tree. This tree grew in the vicinity of the Dagri Forest Rest House on the walk from Thandiani to Nathiagali.
It's still there. Checked it out last year.
You checked it out. It was a local species of the oak known as Bruji. Its age was estimated at 500 years.
1500.
1500.
1500.
It stands 140 feet tall with a girth of 21 feet. For extension, you have a long. He says, I grabbed its hefty girth in a hug and put my face against its lichen-covered trunk. And as he did so, from somewhere in the forest came the ugly thwack, thwack of another tree being hacked to death. And he wonders, could our tree hear that dreadful sound as well? So, and of course in his last book, which is really, it can't really be described as a travel book, it's a memoir, where he's traveling from Wagah border to Jalandhar, which was his ancestral city. He writes about a peepal tree, which is right in the middle of a busy East Punjab road, and with traffic passing on both sides of it. And he's riding in a car that he has rented for that particular wherever he was going. And he plays devil advocate with the driver, and he suggests to his companion Bakshish Singh that for greater convenience the tree should be cut down. And of course the man is horrified and says that you can get away by taking a man's life, but to cut down a tree, it's just not, something that one does. So I think you've talked quite a lot, not only about the exhilaration of journeying and traveling and sleeping in all kinds of places and eating all kinds of food, edible and inedible. And you've also talked about the depredations that you see as a traveler. So the traveler's tales are not just, it seems, full of exotic things and people with many heads and so on, but it seems that there are quite a lot of disturbing and painful things too that you are a witness to. I was looking at one of your books and there are pictures, pictures of this Haveli, which while the owners were still living, was being pulled down. And you have this beautiful picture of the mosaic floor. And in a sense, beauty can sometimes move you to so much sorrow. It's beautiful to look at, but it's also something that can move you to tears. And would you like to tell us about, don't start me off on crying over things that are lost. I belong to a generation which is now dying. But something that lifts your spirits, because you have a great sense of humor. Please tell us something that, things that you remember from your encounters with people, for example. I know about goats and chickens. The goats and chickens in the railway.
Oh, yes.
Railway journeys.
If you travel along a railway line and happen to spend a night in a railway rest house, there's always this ancient cook who, when you ask him what's for dinner, he says, Sahab, chicken curry, brown rice or egg poutine. Caramel cream is egg poutine. But now that generation is gone. That was from the British time. And people are wonderful. They say some really great things. For example, my favorite story these days is how people tell directions.
Yes.
In Sindh, I don't know if anyone knows Hyderabad, but supposing you're standing on the Kotri Bridge and you ask someone for some place in downtown Hyderabad like Tilak Chari, he'll tell you, hello Vanjo Sain, Siddho. You ask him, Pandaghana Baba, how far is it? And he'll say, Hikdo Farlanga Sain, it'll be more than 10 kilometers. In Sangar, you ask him how far Hyderabad is. Hikdo Farlanga Sain. The standard unit is Hikdo Farlang. The Pathans are on the opposite side. You come to this man and you say, Bhaijan, wo Ranigat jana hai. Ha, Ranigat. Ho, nek ladsha. And you look at him. Pokhto poshwa kana? कि नहीं जी पश्तो नहीं आती. हाँ फिक्र मत को नेक जाओ 500 मीटर के बाद पुल आएगा. पुल पोशवा है यार ये नहर का पुल आओ कना नहर का पुल 500 मीटर उधर से तुमने वोल्टा हाथ जाना है. 450 मीटर के बाद तालाब आएगा. उसके पार देखो तुम्हारा जगह रानीगढ़. You go, you look at your odometer, it's exactly 500 meters to the bridge and exactly 650 meters to the talab.
What about the Balochi?
The Baloch, there are two kinds of Baloch. One who are now a little urbanized and they'll tell you all sorts of remarkable stories. But there's one person who lives in the outback of Kolu or in the outback of Kharan or Chaghe or Panjgur, who still walks with a water skin slung on his shoulder, and he's walking in this wilderness with nothing in sight. So you ask him, in Kolu for example, कि भाईजान तदड़ी तल जाना है. No word. In Balochistan, the distances are so great. There are landmarks, but he'll just point to you in that direction. And you know, the Baloch always remind me of the man with no name in Clint Eastwood films. They're like that. In Lailpur, never ask, I call it Lailpur still. In Lailpur, never ask anyone for the way. Bhaijan, Abdullahpur jana hai. Lage jao. The blighter will be bloody sure Abdullahpur is in that direction. Lage jao. And if you're, Punjabis are, we are fantastic people. You're on this country road headed for some place and you're on the left side of the road. There's no one else. Across the road on the other side, there's a man, he's probably digging an irrigation channel or something. And you stick your neck out. It's really like sticking your neck out. And you say, Bhai ji, change mange jana, main theek ja rahe hain. Change mange jana. Oh khlo ja, main bhi udhar hi jana, main bhi naal hi ਉਹਨੇ ਧੋਤੀ ਸਿੱਧੀ ਕਰਨੀ ਜੁੱਤੀਆਂ ਪਾਣੀਆਂ ਤੇ ਸੜਕ that's the time to run. My friend Akmal is from Abbottabad and I have this joke about people from Haripur. You begin from Hazara. You begin in Haripur and all the way up to the Babusar Pass. You arrive in a village and you're walking through the bazaar and you ask someone, the tailor master or somebody, कि भाई जी मैं अकमल मलिक साहब दे घर जाना है. तुसी कित्थों आए हो? You know, you have to run your hand over your head के एंटेना तो नहीं निकल आए मेरे के, or my skin has turned green or something, you know. तुसी कित्थों आए हो? And the people of Mianwali, they're Niazis, just forgive them. Here's something they'll always do. This I first experienced 40 years ago when I was motorcycling. 40, yes. When I was motorcycling around Pakistan, you stop at a place, there's a man doing something, and you ask him, "Ke bhai, main Kala Bagh jana hai, kede passe jawa?" Tusi Kala Bagh jana hai? He'll ask you as if that's the strangest thing to do. You name any place in the world. Tusi Kala Bagh jana hai? Then I was young and I had a better sense of humor, I suppose. I would say, nahi, nahi, main jana to Tokyo si, main kya Kala Bagh da raah bhi puch hi liye. It still happens, and 2 years ago, in 2016, I frequently passed through Mianwali. So I would just stop. I knew which I was going to Dera Ismail Khan. I knew the way, but I would just for the heck of it say, "Oh, bhai, Dera Ismail Khan ali kedi sadak hai? Tusi Dera Ismail Khan jana hai?" And I'd say, "Nahi, main jana te tere ghar hai, and this is what I'm going to do." And get away at super speed. Thank God no one's been able, no one's ever followed me. Or if they did, they never were able to catch up with me, or I wouldn't be here telling this story. But people, Nyazis from Mianwali do get to high places.
Yes, they do manage. If you'll allow me, I'd like to read a little extract from one of his railway journeys. That has to do with humor and creature life. This is, of course, what Salman has been regaling us with, our stories, that have got a human basis for comedy. This is while he's taking a journey in Sindh from Nawab Shah to Mirpur Khas. A very fine-featured Sindhi strode onto the platform carrying a bleating kid in his arms, a little goat baby. I followed him into the train. He took a seat beside a sleeping Ajrakt man, produced a banana from his pocket, ate the fruit himself and gave the peel to the goat. He then fixed himself so comfortably as he could on the bench and went off to sleep. The goat studied the catch on the window for a while, sniffed at its master and at the next man, and then began to chew and emit a low growl-like snore, and then calmly began to chew on the man's ajrak. For a full 15 minutes, the animal fed itself on the cloth until a hefty tug brought the man out of his slumber. He sputtered, tried to wrap himself in his ajrak, and then realized that part of it was down the goat's throat. There was a little struggle for possession of the cloth, in the course of which the owner of the goat was roused. Together the man extricated about 30 centimeters of cloth from within the goat, who seemed very reluctant to part with its dinner. And they are still carrying along, clattering along the scattered sand dunes of the great Thar desert. The unfortunate owner of the goat had again dozed off with his animal straddling his lap. The goat studied the green wall of the carriage with utmost application for some time before turning its attention to the darkness outside the window. It then bent its rear legs ever so slightly and proceeded to urinate in its master's lap. The animal had emptied a goodly portion of its bladder before the man woke up and realized what was happening. He pushed the animal away, at the same time landing a hefty thump on its flank. None in the compartment showed any emotion on this going on, except the man with the ajrak. He had a smirk of absolute satisfaction on his face. Could you tell us about your railway journeys a little bit?
Yes, this happened in the 1980s. I had just read Paul Theroux's The Great Railway Bazaar and the Old Patagonian Express. The Great Railway Bazaar actually set this off. I thought I should travel on railway lines that no one else uses. And this Nawab Shah to Mirpur Khas or I did 6 or 7 journeys, traveled around Punjab as well. Oh, Bannu to Kalabagh, these were narrow gauge lines, and they still had those little steam engines and lovely carriages. And I also traveled from Quetta to the Iranian frontier to do another bit of this little railway bazaar. The idea was not getting anywhere. I didn't have anything to do in Dalbandi. The only idea was to travel, and it was a great experience. I think that really made me famous because Ambar Khairi, who writes in the news on Sunday, we met after many years when I was doing this. We had met after 6 or 7 years, and we were talking, and she said, "What are you doing now?" I said, "I am a writer now." She says, "Oh, you're the mad travel writer." So it was great fun, the Railway Bazaar.
He's described the movement of the train because actually he doesn't like to, I think, publicly admit it, but he is a poet. As the train rolled along, the boiler made a grinding movement. This, I thought, was almost sensuous, something that was not altogether different from what a voluptuous dancer would make. Now, there are very few people traveling in trains who would describe the actual movement in this way. There is also a little story about one of the best cups of tea that you have had. Would you like to tell us?
These were steam engines on the narrow gauge and meter gauge trains, and every time the train stopped, the man, the fireman, and driver's sidekick, he would jump off. He had a little kettle, do something just under us, and bring back a steaming kettle full of nice smelling tea. The tea was really good, and there was a pot of milk hanging next to the boiler, so that was always kept on the boil. The engine drivers would tell me ये चाय सबसे अच्छी इसलिए है क्योंकि अगर आप फ्लूज की लंबाई गिने बॉयलर के अंदर तो वो इतने मील बनती है, और something like that. I think a couple of miles, he said, there were copper flues.
That's right.
And he says it's the copper that makes the good tea. And you must have a copper kettle at home.
Because it is beneficial for arthritis.
That's right. Maybe that's why I don't have arthritis.
All the tea that you've had on the trains. Human interest. A lot of travel writers, obviously, one focuses when one reads travel literature on what is being described in terms of land. I think a very important aspect of your writing has to do with the human beings whom you encounter. And these are ordinary people, common people. How important is it really for you? I mean, in any journey that you take, what is the place of the human component take? I mean, where exactly? I mean, is it obviously for the reader it's very important, but what about you as the traveler?
I know they're very central to my story, and I listen to them, hear their stories, and they're always mentioned, I think, with a little bit of compassion. Some of my favorite characters, one was in 1986, I was trekking up to Borogal Pass in Chitral. They didn't let me get to Borogal because I was arrested on suspicion of being a spy. Because I was always traveling alone. And in the 1980s, there were no solitary trekkers in Pakistan. Not Pakistanis, foreigners, yes, but I was always asked, "Kya chakkar hai?" And there's a little village called Kishmanja in the upper Yarkhoon Valley. It had been a very bad summer with rain and clouds, and it was, I think, late August. The wheat was still not ripe, and it was not going to ripen because another 10 or 15 days and the frosts would have set in. We arrived in Kishmanja and passed by a very poor house where a man virtually in rags with a little boy was working outside in the field. And Chitralis are wonderful people. They see a lone traveler and they hail the traveler, bring him home. And in those days at least, they fed me chicken, roast chicken and parathas. And I came back 2 kilograms heavier despite the fact that I was carrying a backpack of 28 kilograms. So this man in Kishmanja, he insisted on feeding us chicken, but from his
meager, frugal,
yes, outlook, I said, "No, please don't." And yet he gave us parathas and fried eggs. But that's remarkable. My friend Hasil Chandio in the Kirthar Mountains, for example, he is a great teller of stories, and his diction is so classic. It comes, it reminds you of the time when caravans used to
yes,
travel, and people were put up by kind people, and
see, this is, it's unusual for a man to be moved in public, and it is even more unusual, I think, for a traveler to be so moved by, this is an experience that he's had. And I don't think that we can ask him any more questions about it, but you can see.
But here's one thing he once said to me. We were sitting on a hill, on a peak in the Kirthar Mountains. He handed me there were planes flying way above us. He handed me his binocular and he said to me, "This, I mean, budha kedi badshai jo jahaz hai." Now this is, no, Punjabi would never say, "Kaun si badshai da jahaz hai." Such beautiful words. These people are untainted by television. Television has been our bane, by the way, Ijaz Haider.
We hold him responsible for the ills of television. So obviously human beings do they play a very important part. And again, there is absolute democracy, it seems, in travel writing. Because a democracy and also a kind of egalitarianism, because he's not interested in the afsars, although he does acknowledge in many of his books the help and the cooperation of some exceptionally enlightened people who happen to be bureaucrats or in places of influence who have helped him. So he acknowledges them fully. But by and large, Salman, your interaction is with, as I said, ordinary people,
yes,
humble people.
Yeah.
And I think that must add a whole dimension to your experience as a traveler.
Yes, it does a very strange thing to you. You become it instills humility in the traveler, and you are no longer
the educated sahab who's
sahab. Hasil Chandio, for example, he's a totally illiterate man. He speaks only Balochi and Sindhi, and yet I caught him telling his friends so many times about me, Dado padiyal manua. He's a very well-read man. I don't know how he figured that out, but he would always tell his friends, Dado padiyal manua Sreman.
ये मैं आपको थोड़ा सा कुछ इनकी लिखाई, क्योंकि मैं इनकी किताबों में से पढ़ रही हूँ, और इनका जो स्टाइल जो है वो यानी एक लिहाज से उसका बहुत ख़तरा है। वो ये है कि आप उसको पढ़ के ही इतने खुश हो जाते हैं कि आपका दिल ही नहीं करता कि आप कुर्सी से उठ के बाहर कहीं जाएं। तो वो एक नुकसान तो उसका है। आई मीन व्हेन योर प्रोज इज़ सो फाइन एंड सो रीडेबल, as I said, you won't be tempted to ever move out of your chair, but nevertheless I would still prefer to stay in my chair and read good prose. बहुत सी किताबें हैं जी, इन्होंने 9 किताबें लिखी हैं. This is an early book and it has a lovely picture of Salman as a young man, which I hope you won't mind sharing with the audience. This is Riders on the Wind, and perhaps we can also ask him, maybe one of you would like to ask him who these riders on the wind are, because one has this wonderful, I had this very romantic image, of horses and so on, kind of desert Pegasus. But this is a very different variety of riders on the wind. Now this is of course your general comment on bureaucracy and bureaucrats. He is talking on one of his journeys. This journey is no more than a blur of rattling full tilt past scattered fields of young wheat, where troops of egrets stroll like high-flying bureaucrats on inspection, and ugly brown paddy birds stolidly supervise the activity of the rare frog or two, and still not gone into hibernation in the ditches by the road. So most travellers in the bus were Christians, dressed in their best finery, orange trousers, green pullovers, mauve shalwar suits, and golden slippers with red socks, for it was Christmas Day. There were squabbling children, comforting mothers, haggling youngsters, conferring elders into a driver with a plastic bag full of bananas on the dashboard, into which he delved every time the bus stopped longer than half a minute. So he must have consumed several dozens of bananas. Has literature influenced you? Because I've been talking about your prose style, because it is there.
I don't know. I confess that I have not read any literature at all. The only 3 books of fiction that I've read: The Count of Monte Cristo when I was 15, unabridged, and recently Staying On by Paul Scott, and Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. I haven't read literature. I am very, very unread. The only thing I've read is British explorers of the 19th century and the 20th century. That's all.
This is, well, I mean, I must compliment him on his taste, and I think there are some of us, I know Ilona will agree, that perhaps there is fiction to be read and fiction not to be read. And Salman's selection is an excellent one. It shows very good taste. But then of course he is a very pada likha man, so
Dado padiyal manu.
अब आप इसको ज़रा देखें, अगर ये नज़्म नहीं है तो क्या है ये? The day had dawned dismally, but soon began to look glorious. The eastern sky was held up by pillars of sunlight, slanting out shreds of blue and grey blotching the dunes with an ethereal light. The west and the north were dark grey and shapeless, and the peaks in the south were bathed in brilliant golden light. Now this is very accessible prose, but it is so beautiful. It's not picturesque, it is beautiful. So I'm sure the little literature that you have read has obviously got to the right places, like the hot water in the pipes of the train with their load of copper. How are we doing for time? We have just 5 minutes. Salman, would you like to share something more about your travels, your
human beings.
Human beings.
I was in Mashkel. If you look at the map of Balochistan, the big M that it makes with Iran, that's Mashkel, in the middle part of that M. And I had to come back. I was traveling with Kamil Khan Mumtaz Saab and Aksi Mufti. They resolved to go to Iran. I didn't, because the man said to me, Patloon kameez, he was an Iranian, he said, Patloon kameez mein tum nahi ja sakte, shalwar kameez pehnoge to jaoge. So I told him what I wanted to do to his country. And Kamil Saab had to shut me up. And I didn't go. I came, so I decided to come back to Quetta. Went in the evening to find out when the bus would leave, and the man said, Saab, subah 6 baje chalenge. I got my ticket, 250 rupees. And I arrived at we were staying with the assistant commissioner. I arrived at the bus stop bus stand at 6 o'clock. It was pitch dark. It was November, the day Benazir was for the second time booted out of government. It was, Balochistan is so far west. In November it was like midnight there at 6 o'clock. So I went around and knocking on it was like an old sarai with doors around a compound, with rooms around a compound. I went knocking around and finally found this man sleeping. He was the man who was the driver I had met the night before. Woke him up and I said, yaar, wo bus nahi jani? कहता जाएगी ना? मैंने कहा तो तुमने कहा था 6 बजे जाएगी, तो 6 बजे जाएगी ना? So I held up my watch and I said कि यार 6 तो बज गए. So he looks out of the open door, scratches his head and says, हैं? 6 इतना वक्त ही बजता है? On the same journey, as we were rolling past the Rasco Mountains, which are now known as the Chagai Hills, they are actually the old name, the classical name is Rasco. On this bus, we were only 3 passengers, 11 conductors with a driver, and of the 3 passengers, I was the only Pakistani. There were 2 Iranians who spoke only Persian, and there were about 100 sacks filled with dates. So as we were rolling past the Rasco Hills, Jilani, the most talkative conductor, he looks around, comes up to me and he says, वो तुम्हारा काउटा खाली है, वो सारे बम इस पहाड़ के अंदर आ गए. Now, here's the army going around in circles trying to keep everything secret, and here's Jilani who drives past that hill once every other day, and he knows this is November 96. Exactly a year and a half later, that's where they did their nuclear test. In the Kalachita mountains, I have been walking in the Kalachita mountains of Attak, and in 97 or 98, I found this chain link fence going on for mile after mile. So I asked my driver, "Ki hai?" Kehanda ji bam rakh rahe ne andar. So I asked him how he knew. He says, मेरा पुत्र bulldozer चलांदा है जी, वो अंदर जेड़ा मोरा कर रहे हैं ना, वो bulldozer नाल कर रहे हैं, तो मेरा पुत्र है उधर ते, वो ला के आ रहे हैं ट्रकों उत्ते बम सारे, ऐथे ही. And if you don't know where they keep the fuses, I do. That also comes from the horse's mouth, right outside the fuse factory.
Ask the driver.
I think the floor is now open for questions that you might like to ask Salman.
Yes, sir.
Have you heard your king's shortened version of them? I'd just like to make two comments. First, I feel a little sorry for you, and I'll tell you why.
Sir, थोड़ा सा ऊपर कर लें इसको.
I'll tell you why I feel a little sorry for you. I studied in a madrasa in England, a few hundred years old. On my department was a plaque. The world is degenerating these days. Bribery and corruption abound. Children no longer mind their parents. Every man wants to write a book. It is clear that the end of the world is at hand.
Socrates.
No, a Mesopotamian tablet about 900 BC. Anyway. Secondly, sir, I'd just like to share very quickly, you mentioned Balochistan. I traveled public transport from England to Pakistan in 1965. Took me 35 days. Total cost 53 pounds sterling, public transport. Many stories on the way, but in Vienna, I saw a pastry shop. Viennese pastry was famous. Went inside, picked a pastry. I had a PIA bag with me, the green bag. The lady said, "You're from Pakistan?" Behind the counter, she was standing there. She said, "No, try the other one." I did that. She said, "Like it?" "Yes, you can eat it here, and it's my gift to you." I said, "Why?" "My family and 3 other bakeries, patisseries in Vienna have been importing dates from Turbat in Pakistan for the last 3-4 generations." That was news for me. And said that on the way, landed up, what's this place, Tabriz to Iran, and then across to Pakistan. I could stop my journey anyway, the Orient Express, go up and down, east, north, south, then come back after 2 days, join it, go on. 13 pounds was the ticket from London to Istanbul. That's all. Now, to cross Iran, I had to go by bus. And can you believe it, in 1965, there was no blacktop road between Tabriz and Tehran, just gravel. And then in Isfahan, what I remember, we used to read, but children too poor to have lights in their homes, so they were studying and reading, groups of people under the street lights. But then when I landed in Pakistan, then when I had this dal, chane ki dal and roti, I was very happy.
Thank you very much.
Lovely session, obviously. I'm biased. Professor Sirajuddin, I was transported back to the classroom years ago. Salman, I just wanted to take you back to what Professor Sirajuddin mentioned as the unsurveyed. And the reason I ask you this is you're not just a travel writer, given you a very fine sensibility. I was just wondering about the paradox here in terms of actually going and discovering something, the unsurveyed, and then for the unsurveyed to lose its mystique. Is that something that you also felt?
In a little way, because you see, Shipton, the area that intrigued me the most, and which is also part of this work, the Apricot Road to Yarkand, that has now been surveyed. There is not an inch of land there that does not belong on the map. But sometimes you do have this feeling of the place losing its mystique. In bits of Balochistan, like trekking from the mouth of the Hub River up to its source, 400 kilometers, that did this thing to me.
Hello. Yeah. So you have trekked and hiked in Siran Valley and Kahan Valley, and I know you have a very strong sort of love for that place. Have you been recently? Have you seen what they've done to Kahan Valley? Now there's a McDonald's between Mansehra and Ahmedabad.
I've passed through Kagan in last year, and in 2016 my heart is completely broken. I just don't want to go back there again. Shogran was the complete was a debacle. Shogran has been raped beyond redemption. This is a criminal act that they've done there. I think time to say thank you very much.
In that case, let me just go back to what you said about me being on television. This is like a Yeatsian, dull, decrepit age that is now tied to me. The fact is that I prefer to write, Salman, and you know that.
The rest of the quotation is as to a dog's tail. Dogs are. Thank you very much, Salman Rashid. Sorry.
Question. I would like to ask how has traveling enriched your life? How it has inspired you? How it has transformed you as a human being?
One, it has given me great humility, and secondly, I have lost all my prejudice. I have no prejudice for anyone now. I think that's great enrichment.
My question is, during your all traveling and great era, did you experience any mystic or spiritual event in your journeys, or any inspirational event?
Francis' young husband did, and I said he went crazy after that. Thank you very much. I don't want to experience any spiritual thing. Francis' young husband was a great Victorian explorer. Yes. Last question.
जी सर, आपने रानीगढ़ की बात की. आई एम फ्रॉम दैट पार्ट ऑफ द वर्ल्ड. मेरा गांव है.
चलें फिर चलते हैं.
नहीं चलेंगे, लेकिन मैं थोड़ा सा बताऊं कि हाउ इट इज़ वैंडलाइज्ड बाय द पीपल. मैं व्हेन आई वाज अ यंग चाइल्ड, माय ब्रदर, माय एल्डर ब्रदर यूज्ड टू गो फॉर हंटिंग. मैं जाया करता था रानीगढ़ साथ. तो द स्टैचूज देवर, मतलब सारे बहुत होते थे, और वो जो स्टैंडिंग बुद्धास और एवरीथिंग, और द प्लेट्स विच डिपिक्ट्स अ स्टोरी लाइक, हम साथ लेके आते थे. फिर वालदा कहती है इसको फेंक तो बाहर, ये तो क्या कहते हैं गुनाह है इस तरह. फिर देन वो सारा स्टार्ट हो गया, और पीपल यूज टू, इट इज़ लाइक इतने मैंने देखे 4-5 years का जब मैं था, 45 years और 46 years बैक. तो उस या अजीज़ डेरी उसके साथ है, उसके साथ जो हुआ, तो सिर्फ मैं आपको जस्ट
आप चरसदा शेखान ढेरी वो पुष्कलावती है.
एग्जैक्टली.
पुष्कलावती के साथ मैंने 1992 में प्रोफेसर फरीद ख़ान जैसे काबिल आर्कियोलॉजिस्ट ने मुझे जाके वहाँ जो दास्तानें सुनाई थी, वो मेरी इधर वो इनग्रेन हो गई. अभी रिसेंटली कुछ 4 साल पहले मैं गया कि मैं एक बार फिर पुष्कलावती देख लूँ, तो वहाँ कुछ भी नहीं था,
कुछ भी नहीं,
वो सब फारिग. तो एक आदमी खड़ा था, मैंने कहा भाईजान वो खुदाई वुदाई किधर है? कहता है अच्छा सारा खुदाई है, देखो खुदाई. तो मैंने देखा कि हर कोई गेती पेचा लेके शुरू है. वो खुदाई, उसको वो मैं भूल गया था कि पश्तो में तो आप आसार कदीमा कहते हैं उसको, असल चीज़ को. अरे ये सारा खुदाई है, देखो. लोग लगे हुए निकाल रहे हैं धड़ाधड़. यार वो पुष्कलावती ख़त्म हो गया. यहाँ तो रोज़ ये दुख की दास्तानें हैं. टिल्ला जोगिया में जाके देखें जो लोगों ने हाल किया. 1974 में 25-30 समाधियाँ थीं वो मुग़ल तालाब के साथ. अब मेरा ख्याल है 2 भी नहीं रही. गुरु नानक की इबादत गाह जो थी जहाँ उन्होंने चिल्ला काटा था उसको ढा दिया। ये चूनिया में एक राजा टोडरमल की बनाई हुई बारादरी है, उसको जो सत्यानाश किया खजाने ढूंढने वालों ने। मतलब हमारे डिप्टी कमिश्नर, असिस्टेंट कमिश्नर कहाँ गुमे होते हैं, इन्हें पता नहीं चलता कि काम ख़राब हो रहा है, कोई बताने वाला इन्हें नहीं है कि भाई क्या हो रहा है मुल्क में। भाई तो हम तो ख़जाने ढूंढने के चक्कर में सब सत्यानाश कर दिया। सिंधी इस मामले में ज़रा बेहतर हैं, वो इतनी तोड़ फोड़ नहीं करते। पठान और पंजाबी तिक्के खाते हैं और बस शुरू हो जाते हैं।
Like archaeologists who have restored those buildings,
रिस्टोर्ड,
restored the monuments.
रिस्टोरेशन की बहुत हमारे पास कुछ तो, एक तो कामरान की बारादरी है, वो जो बेवकूफ़ सियासतदानों ने करवा दिया उसके साथ, वो कामरान की थोड़ा है, वो तो वो नवाज शरीफ की बारादरी है। लेकिन अगर आप रिस्टोरेशन की अच्छी बात करते हैं, मरियम ज़मानी मस्जिद लाहौर में, या और ये फ़ौजियों ने की, फ़ौजियों से हम ऐसी कोई तवक्को नहीं रखते थे, लेकिन वो अली मर्दान का जो का घर है पेशावर में, जो कोर हेडक्वार्टर के अंदर आता है, उसके साथ जो जनरल नज़ीर भट्ट ने कराया है काम, वो अनबिलीवेबल है। दैट इज़ अ मॉडल ऑफ हाउ यू शुड रीस्टोर अ बिल्डिंग। दे वर गोइंग टू टेयर इट डाउन. If Nazir Bhatt hadn't had the good sense, the building would have been gone. It's a 350-year-old building. It's a priceless monument. They've restored it beautifully. वो खैर आर्कियोलॉजिस्ट का काम था, लेकिन नज़ीर भट्ट was the prime mover. अच्छा, फिर वो वज़ीर खान्स मॉस्क, मतलब अच्छा काम भी किया है, लेकिन कम. Thank you very much.